This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today has no shortage of strong opinions, backed by some creative thinking and the hard data. He is Bryan Caplan, an American economist, professor of economics at my alma mater, once again, George Mason University. He's a research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason and is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. This is Bryan's second appearance on the show, and as you will quickly see, Bryan is rapid fire. He goes out there, he slays dragons, and he throws back the ideas. You got to catch him fast. And I have to say, there's some things that really make me laugh. He really cracks me up on a lot of things. I think that's probably one of the reasons why he frequently contributes to Freakonomics. Our conversation today is about his newest book, The Case Against Education. Bryan draws on the economic concept of job market signaling. Bryan argues that much of higher education is extremely inefficient and only has a small effect on improving human capital, contrary to much of the conventional consensus among labor economists. If you've not yet had a chance to go check out Bryan Caplan's works, his books, his writings, go dig in. But now, let's jump right into my conversation with Bryan Caplan. So Bryan, I've got this review in front of me of your newest book. It's from the Washington Post, and Sarah Carr gives a little review. And I just want to quote a few lines from this because I thought it was a great setup for our conversation. She first describes you as a self-proclaimed libertarian. That's one thing. She often specious reasoning, cheeky questions. Oh, last but not least, his proposal would transform an admittedly deeply unequal society into a serfdom, more permanently consigning low-income citizens to minimum wage jobs that require next to no literacy or numeracy skills or no jobs at all. You're like the nastiest guy on the planet.
I don't think so, but right.
But look, I'd be happy to get that review if I wrote a book, because when somebody doesn't really want to address the substance, really, and they just want to kind of throw the ad hominem at you, you kind of know you've won.
I think declaring victory is premature, but it wasn't a very good review.
Let's jump into the big picture here. I think in her case is look, she doesn't want to change anything, right? Nobody wants to change anything. Everyone knows about the U.S. collegiate system. I mean, there's an arm and a leg is paid. I mean, the average kid is going to go to a 4-year institution and spend a ton of money. And you know what, though? The stats say, though, if you spend that money in college, you're going to get a better job, right?
Well, they say that if you finish your degree, then you are likely to get a better job, yes. I mean, the heart of my book is just to question the social value of the education. I say the main thing that's going on is that you jump through a bunch of hoops. You're not going to really use most of what you learned in school on the job ever. But still, it's impressive to employers. It's a great way of convincing employers that you are worthwhile, that you're smart, that you're hardworking, and you're conformist. And the problem is that, socially speaking, everyone can't be impressive. If everyone gets the degree, then you need a second degree to look good, and so on. And we can see this in the huge credential inflation that's gone on in the U.S. over the last 70 years, where for one and the same job, you now need a lot more education, not really to do it, but to get it.
Look, you make the big picture point. You say it's just a big waste of time and money. I love having academics on this show. I love having people from diverse backgrounds that have these amazing research paths they've gone down. But you know what? I'm just a guy with a podcast who gets to stay in school, but I don't have to rely on it. It's not my job. It's my job and this is what I do. But in the sense that it's different if you're in the university and you're the kid. I mean, so many of these classes, so many of these things that one can take in school, I mean, how does it translate? And that's your big point. It doesn't translate, it just signals.
Right. Yeah, so by the way, so the subtitle is Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. So it's different from the education being a waste of time and money. If you leave out the word system, then it makes it sound like it's not a good investment for the individual. So I say, as long as you're very likely to graduate, I think it generally is a good investment. Rather, what I'm saying is that as a society, we're making a big mistake, and especially as taxpayers, we're making a big mistake to shower so much money on this very wasteful rat race that we're doing.
Let's start to break that apart, though. Like, what the pushback? I mean, you go out there, you lay this predicate down there, and of course, a lot of people aren't going to want to see that apple cart upset. Let's talk about something really basic about the education system. You make the great point as I left that word out. And that system includes teachers. You're a teacher, you're a professor. But it's also, let's face it, these are jobs. I don't think sometimes we necessarily think, what is the great push to keep that system in place? It's a basic human thing. If you've got a job, you want to preserve it.
Well, I would say that the main thing to realize is that this stuff is super popular to taxpayers. I couldn't find a single country on earth where most taxpayers want to cut education spending. It's true that teachers are likely to beat the drums and call public attention to any cut in spending. But the reason why that works is that they have so much public sympathy. And I think the reason they have that sympathy partly is just because teachers seem like nice people, but so much of it is just that people buy the idea that school is enriching our society and it's preparing students for their careers and for life. And what I say is that that's not totally wrong, but it's like 80-90% wrong. And if you go and properly adjust for that, then it just doesn't look like a very good deal for society.
What started you down this path with this particular book? What was the inspiration? What was the trigger moment that got you started down this path?
I'm not even really exaggerating to say I think it's starting kindergarten. So it was even at a very young age. I was doing well in school, but I was like, why do I have to learn this stuff? When is this going to come up in real life? Adults would tell me, well, look, yeah, probably it's not going to come up in real life. But if you don't do well here, then you're going to close a lot of doors for yourself. You have to go and jump through these hoops if you want to succeed. And again, like when I was a little kid, I'm like, that's kind of weird. Why is it that you have to do this stuff? But still, I'd say, well, if I look at the adults that have good jobs, almost all of them have a lot of education and were good students. So I guess I better go along with it. And then, the more I stayed in school, the more puzzled I got, the more useless material was piled on. And yet I didn't see any sign that I could get away with saying no and still have a successful career. Right. And then I think, by the time I was just in junior high, that was when, I think at that point I had like some proto signaling model in mind. Then when I started studying economics, I found out there's a lot of people who had been thinking about this for a very long time, and they kind of agreed with me. Although, again, then why write the book? And again, the reason is that the signaling model of education that the book is based upon, while it's got very high status in pure theory, Michael Spence has a Nobel Prize for this work, but among people who actually look at the world, among empirical people who do education or labor economics, they give the signaling model very short shrift. They don't take it very seriously. And this book is there to say you should take it seriously. It's not just a mathematical toy. It is a model that explains a great many puzzles about the world.
It doesn't take much. Even if you're on the outside looking in, somebody who's not done the research like myself, I've not done the research on where you've gone with this particular work. But the signaling makes immediate common sense for anyone that has common sense. Because otherwise, how else can a quote employer even make a judgment as to whether or not it's all one big guess?
Right. I've heard people say, oh, don't worry about it so much because once you're on the job for a couple months, then employers will figure it all out. And in the book, I reply to that and say, yeah, well, maybe they do after a few months, although even that sounds pretty optimistic. But suppose that employers know the real you after 3 months. That doesn't do you very much good if you don't have a job yet, because in order to be evaluated for 3 months, you have to get hired. To get hired, you have to do well in the interview. To do well in the interview, you have to not have your application thrown in the trash. If credentials are crucial for not having your application thrown in the trash, then you need to go and do your 17 years of education or whatever it is, just so you can finally have an employer go and evaluate you based on your merits.
The way the system is set up right now, it's either you go down the path where you signal all along the way, or You work for yourself. You start a business. You're an entrepreneur. It's like there's no middle ground, because if you, and I'm on the outside of the system. I'm not a part of it. Last time I had a job, I was in a warehouse at Circuit City at age 19.
I love that store.
It's unfortunate though, because it really does take a lot of very bright kids, and it says, hey, you've got to go down this path. And unless you really want to take this huge jump of, let's say, being an entrepreneur or whatnot, you don't really have many options. It's kind of like a gun to your head, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that overstates a bit. There are a bunch of non-college jobs that pay well, especially in the trades, so plumber, electrician. And then again, if you go and look at the distribution, you will see that there are people that only went to high school that end up making a ton of money. So, like what researchers will say is the distributions of earnings for college grads and high school grads mostly overlap. But still, on average, it's true that the college grads are making a lot more money. And depending upon what specific job that you want to do, then it may be absolutely required. So obviously, if you want to be a professor, there's no such thing as becoming a professor when you only finished high school or dropped out. The same is true for a bunch of other jobs. But then, like computer scientists, even now, there are some of these successful computer scientists who even drop out of high school. It's become a lot rarer over time.
One of the points that you make, which I absolutely love, and I believe your colleague Robin Hanson has made it to me as well, too, and I think he was pulling it from your work, is the notion that the best education in the world is already free. And you've observed this. Why don't you describe this story? Because it's really just an awesome vignette to think about.
Yeah. So suppose you think that Princeton is the best university in the world. I've been there. So what I tell you, I know is true. Suppose you want to go to Princeton. You don't have to apply. You don't have to get accepted. You don't have to pay them any money. Just move to Princeton and start unofficially attending classes. The odds are that no one will even notice that you're not supposed to be there. And even if you're compulsively honest and you go to the professor and say, I'm not really a student here, do you mind? Usual reaction of a professor is to get a little tear in their eyes and say, you actually want to learn what I have to teach? This has never happened before. There's just a little problem. At the end of 4 years, you will not have a diploma. You won't have any grades. As a result, hardly anyone on earth wants to try this. People would rather go and pay to some crummy local school rather than attend Princeton for free, because at the crummy local school, there'll be a transcript. Yeah, I mean, and the thought experiment I like to ask people is this. If you could either have a Princeton education with no diploma or Princeton diploma with no education, which one would you want? And I say, look, if you have to think about it, you agree with me, because I'm not saying that signaling is everything. I'm saying that it's important. And if you have to think about it, then you must believe that it's an important issue. I mean, by contrast, if you were stuck on a desert island and someone said, would you rather know how to build boats or rather have a boat building degree? Well, everyone knows, well, yeah, I want to know how to build boats. Who cares about the degree? But if it's a matter for education, it's a very different calculus, because a lot of the reason you get the education is to impress employers rather than to learn how to do anything.
So what's your smallest class? If somebody was to walk in and just kind of sit down, I mean, if it's a 30, 40 person class, you're going to recognize faces.
Well, if they do it on the first day, then you don't know they're not supposed to be there. I mean, so I have taught classes with as few as 4 students. I guess, yeah, so if there were 4 and there were 5 there, then I might be a little puzzled, and I might say, there's one person in the class who hasn't signed up. If they didn't say anything, though, I'd say, all right, well, I don't know what's going on, but you might want to get that sorted out. Yeah, I mean, but if there's 20 students, then you have to remember, professors are only meeting the students a couple times a week, maybe 3 times a week tops, and then they have bigger fish to fry. It doesn't really, professors are not in the business of trying to prevent people from getting free learning. And as I said, if they found out you were doing it, they'd usually be touched, because most of the students are so apathetic. I mean, think about this. Usual attendance in a college class would be about 60% on a given day. If you just eyeball it, the main thing, it's not that you're going to notice the class is too full. Rather, it's just going to be a little less empty than it usually is.
Let me take you to something that I think is really, really interesting. You quote Howard Gardner, psychologist, and talks about the idea of students taking physics classes, and they can solve certain problems if they're taught in a certain way. But if anything deviates, they're just kind of thrown off. And that really raises a bigger picture. I'll let you explain the research in a second here, but it really throws up a bigger picture to me, which is just the idea of problem solving, thinking on your feet versus rote memorization. This is probably the primary reason I never really got it in my BA at George Mason or my MBA at Florida State. By the way, I don't know how I ended up at these 2 Liberty universities, so to speak. Jump at me with that, though, the idea, this notion of thinking on your feet, being able to solve a puzzle versus just rote memorization. It seems like that's so much of this is that.
Yeah, so Gardner calls this the problem of inert knowledge or inert learning. I'd say it's not quite so much that it's just memorization. I mean, some of these studies, these are MIT students. It's not that they can't solve a new problem, but there's this wall of separation between classroom and reality that even excellent students often have, or generally have. And that's like if you're in a classroom and you get a physics problem, then you solve it using physics problem methods. But if you're out in the real world and someone asks you to explain what's going on, then you generally revert to your folk physics. So like an example that I think Gardner gives is if you throw a coin into the air, how many forces are acting on it, right? And are acting on it when it's like a foot from your hand. Most students, including very good physics students, want to say, well, there's two. There's like the continuing force of the push, and then pushing it up, and there's gravity and then there's gravity pulling it back down. And then the real picky ones might say air resistance. But anyway, and then but you've been taught in class a million times, 100 times anyway, that once it leaves the hand, there's no longer any continuing force acting on it. It's not how it works, right? That's basic Newtonian physics. Like once it leaves the hand, then your hand no longer is doing anything. And yet, even very good physics students still revert to this physics, this folk physics when they have to explain the world.
Why do employers? You make the point. You say, hey, look, employers will pay this big premium for people, for students who, spend all this time in subjects unrelated to what they're being hired for. Why have employers not? Why do they accept this signaling? Why do the employers not demand something else?
Right. Well, I mean, you might say that, of course, they pay different wages for different people, and they pay more for people with more experience, and they pay more for people with harder majors, things like that. But yeah, but like when you're right out of college, or like you have no experience, why do they value that so much? And what I say is that your education is a good signal of your intelligence, your work ethic, and also sheer conformity. In other words, it's a way you convince employers who otherwise don't know you from Adam that you've got these traits. There's the deeper question, well, yeah, but why is it that it's such a rigid, inflexible system, right? And that's where I think that this idea of conformity signaling comes in, because there's lots of ways to show you're smart. There's lots of ways to show that you're hardworking, but there aren't a lot of ways to show that you're a conformist sheep, right? Because if you go and do something new or novel, you have a novel way of showing you're a conformist sheep, there's a catch-22. It doesn't show you're a conformist sheep. It shows actually that you are a nonconformist. What I say is that when conformity is important, and of course the conformity is very important for almost any job, there's no I in team, and you need people that will just go along with it, that will go along with the system and exercise their creativity within narrow bounds rather than fundamentally questioning the system. When you want to go and convince someone that you're conformist, you need to go and do it in the conformist way, or else it's going to fail. And so this gives us what I call locked-in syndrome. Which you can see in so many ways, like why is the suit the uniform of business? What a stupid uniform. And yet you don't want to be the first person that goes and walks around in sandals and flip-flops to job interviews.
You're like everyone's favorite economist,
well,
I think.
I don't think so, but I hope you're right. I'd love to be everyone's favorite economist.
Well, you know what I mean. For those people that kind of that don't guzzle Kool-Aid all day long, it's nice to hear someone just kind of take a chance and throw this out and say, "My gosh, look at this crazy world we're living in. Can't we do better?" Let me ask, what do you think is the best criticism of the path that you've gone down for people that just like the Washington Post lady, she just didn't like you at all. But are there criticisms that have made you pause and think, okay, they've got a really good point there. I've gone too far.
Right. Well, I say, there are criticisms that made me pause and think while I was writing the book, and then I tried to put in sections discussing what the authors would say. In terms of intellectual seriousness, there's a famous education economist named Eric Hanushek, and he's done a lot of work on the importance of national test scores on national outcomes. Most education researchers just measure education by inputs, and here Hanushek is with me and saying, yeah, well, you can't just go and have people sit at desks for a bunch of years and expect that to help your country. But then what he does is, but if we go and measure like how people do on tests of on math tests or science tests, He says then it looks very much like it's very like good good scores on those are very important for national prosperity. And in particular, what he says is there's a much bigger effect for countries than for individuals. Like if a 1 point increase on a national test raises your income by 1%, Henischek says that if you get the whole country score up by a point, that would make the country maybe 5% richer. There's a lot of common ground between me and Henischek because we're both very skeptical of the idea that just sitting in school is going to enrich countries. He's more of the mind of, well, then we need to go and rearrange schools so that, and change the way that we're teaching and get better teachers so that we actually cause learning. And my reply to this is, you have a good point in terms, that it's, socially valuable to have, good, at least good, good literacy and numeracy. I'm not really convinced of, this result that you get this, this very large effect, especially of math and science scores. And, intuitively, I'll say, look, most jobs use very little math and almost no science. So how could it really be that raising these scores is the path to national prosperity? And what I say is, there's a much better explanation for for the results that he's finding, and that is that he's really picking up the effect of national differences in intelligence. There, I think it's much easier to explain why having a smart country would be very beneficial for the economy, because people use their intelligence in every job every day. Whereas like science knowledge, you might not use even in the course of a year, but every day you're using your mind to go and deal with new situations. Even a job like a janitor, still there's a spill you haven't encountered before, and you got to figure out what to do about it. And here's the thing. So now it's true that that intelligence can be changed. There's a lot of evidence of this, but it's a lot harder to change it than it is just to boost science scores. So that's where I think that he's going wrong. But he raises a lot of good issues, and I had a debate with him, and I thought it was very fruitful.
I mean, look, if we didn't have across the university systems, if we didn't have quotas, the Asian student mix to take the slots at assorted universities would be quite different than the population mix, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, at very top schools. It's not like Asians are being kept out of college in general, right? But the quotas are keeping them out of from the very top schools and the numbers where they would be if it was just on their merit, sure.
That's a point that people really don't want to discuss. America loves its debates about race, but it's often left out is the Asian student so much. And the Asian student just throws an entire monkey wrench into America's two-sided race debates.
Yes, well, it's even funny because there was one high quality survey where they went and asked white Americans what they thought about affirmative action, and most were against. And they said, yeah, well, but affirmative action would, without affirmative action, then Asians would go and take white spots. And then actually the white respondents said, oh, well, then maybe it's good that we don't have a merit-based system. It's one where, I think it just doesn't get very much publicity because politically, like Asian politicians are generally allied with other minority politicians, even though the actual interests of their groups are directly contrary to each other.
Given the university you're at, let you take off on a point you just made for a second, a little bit big picture point, and you just mentioned merit. And I read that Washington Post piece earlier where she was talking about equality. It just seems like there's a natural rub there that if society spends all of its time trying to have this kind of equality of outcome, where's the merit fit in? It's like there's like something wrong with that, because we all grow up as kids, at least in America. It's like, okay, if you go out to the ball field, the kid that shows up, works the hardest, and can hit the home run, he's going to be the star. That's just the way it's always worked. And I don't know, give me your best take on that right now.
So I'd say that in the area of education, the ethos is still much more about equality of opportunity than equality of results. There's no effort that I've ever seen made to equalize grades or anything like that. So you're right. So like affirmative action programs make a little effort to go and get more quality results, but in terms of the numbers, it's a very small effect. I've got a colleague, Tim Grossclose, who actually. He was a professor at UCLA, and he did a whole book on UCLA's affirmative action system. And I think he FOIA'd his own university, so did Freedom of Information Act on his own university to make them disclose this information. So it's a very good book. But I think when I was asking him, so according to your numbers, how many students at UCLA are there that don't actually deserve to be there based on their test scores? I think his number is like a few hundred a year for an enormous school. I don't think that the actual role of equality of result is really very important in universities. The ideal of equality of opportunity is much bigger. And, I think, mostly, universities live up to that. Although, again, like with the shameful exceptions, like Asians being discriminated against, things like that. Again, like the main thing that I say in the book is that there's this appearance of creating equality of opportunity, in particular of creating opportunities for upward mobility from kids from disadvantaged families. But here's the thing. When you go and increase access to education, you also cause credential inflation, right? Which is, a central concept in the book. Right? And as I said, it's like if you go and just look at the numbers, for one and the same job today, you need a lot more education than your parents or grandparents would have needed to get that job. So I'm not talking about job, computer science or something like a relatively new job. I'm talking about, just to be like a waiter at a nice restaurant or to be a secretary. So employers expect a lot more education than they used to, even though the jobs have not really changed very much, or in some ways are easier than they used to be. So what I say is when you actually look at the big picture, I don't think, I don't think it's clear that university, college, for example, is like increasing, quality of opportunity at all. And again, think about this. So, would you rather be a high school dropout today or a high school dropout in 1950? In 1950, the stigma against a high school dropout was very low because there were so many of them. So, really, again, I think what's going on is that people are so focused on the visible case. Here's a kid from a poor family who went to school and got a good job, that they're not thinking about how they've changed the entire society and made education this union card that you need to get a good job, and which is, of course, really bad for people from disadvantaged families where you've cut off the opportunity to get a good job without college, which they used to have.
Is there any slowdown in credential inflation, or is it just keep inching up?
Normally when you measure credential inflation, you've got to do it over like a 5 or 10 year period at least, because otherwise it's just too hard to see what's going on. Though I think it's just hard to tell whether credential inflation is slowing down recently. I mean, main thing I can say is that I've looked at in the book. Basically, I talk about every study I can find. There's a bunch of different time frames, and all of them seem to come up with pretty similar numbers of something like about 2 years increase per 30 years of time. So, basically like the amount of education you need to get a job is going up by about 0.67 years per decade. But in terms of whether it's slowing down, I don't see any sign that it's slowing down. Well, I would bet that the next study with a longer time frame will find that it's basically continuing just as it has. In fact, my suspicion is that it's going to increase a little bit, because, especially for younger people anyway, because there was a period when college graduation rates were fairly flat for maybe about 10 years or so, and now they've started going up again. So I think actually credential inflation is going to be getting worse.
We're stuck then.
Well, what I say is we're conditionally stuck. As long as the education system has all the government support that it currently has, leading to great accessibility for education, we're going to have this continuing problem of people spending many years of their lives studying stuff that doesn't interest them and that they're not going to need to know after graduation in order to be worthy of a job. So if we were to actually even moderately cut government support for education, then there's good evidence that this would reduce the credential inflation and let people start adult life at an earlier age. Now, there are a lot of people who are hoping that online education is going to save them. I wouldn't rule out the possibility this can help a small minority of people, or this could be a niche. And so you should never dismiss the niche. A niche could be 1 million people, and like 1 million people who can have a better life. That's great. That's way more than I'll ever do. But still, if you want big, dramatic, visible differences in the education system, I think without a fall in government funding, I don't see it.
Beyond government funding, though, kids are going into massive debt to get these degrees to signal. And as you just made the case, to get out of the debt, essentially you postpone life.
I think that, the critics of student debt, I think, have exaggerated their case a bit by focusing on a few dummies who got $500,000 in debt. That is quite unusual. So, and if you're careful, you'll notice people often tell you the mean debt rather than the median, right? Because, debt is something where a few wackos who just go and borrow $500,000 can raise the average a lot. But in terms of the median person, then normally I think it's in the range of like 10 to 20,000, which sounds like a lot. But in terms of the extra earnings you get from college, you can pay that off in a few years, especially given the low interest rates. What I say in the book actually is that student debt is one of the least dysfunctional parts of the system because at least you got skin in the game. At least with student debt, there are students saying, do I really want to borrow all this money for my degree in puppetry? Maybe not.
The degree in puppetry?
Puppetry, yes. That's a joke, but it's also real, right? So it was, there in the movie Being John Malkovich, the guy had a degree in puppetry. Although there was also a few years later a story about a guy with a MFA in puppetry who couldn't get a job. So that's a little Easter egg for your Being John Malkovich fans. But a great movie if you haven't seen it. All right, so whereas when government picks up the whole tab and when there's free college or heavily subsidized college, that's where people are really not very careful in considering whether it's worthwhile. So, my view is, like a big problem with populist discontent with universities that it's so focused on the student rather than the taxpayer. Right, and the student at least has the students have ways of solving their own problems with prudence, but the taxpayer, they're the ones that are really stuck getting their blood sucked. Like a lot of what I try to do in the book is to reorient our concern towards the taxpayer and like how they're getting ripped off and for what? Just to waste a ton of money.
One of the things that I love is the big picture question that you pose. Say, hey, if learning is not useful, if it's not inspirational, like at a ground level, we can go in so many different directions on this topic. There's a lot of depth here. But if it's not useful, it's not inspirational, I think what you're really challenging everybody is to say, hey, let's take a step back. We're at this place right now. Can it be done better? And when you pose a simple question like that, is it useful? Is it inspirational? I think that causes many thinking people, the few of us that hopefully are still left, to pause for a second.
Yeah, hopefully. I'd say the main thing that I try to do in the book is to get people to forget propaganda about what school is supposed to be like, and just to think about what they've seen with their own two eyes. And again, when you say it's common sense, it totally is, but there are many people who, when you tell them this, just go and almost sound like a robot and just say, no, school is this excellent thing that is the glue that binds our society together. It is a wonderful experience. And when someone says, well, was yours wonderful? Well, no, mine wasn't wonderful at all. Mine was terrible. Where are you getting this stuff about how great it is? It's not from firsthand experience. It's from repeating words that other people have told you in this pious tone. And, a lot of what I want to do in the book is to say, let's look at this as it really is. And, it's fine to say it could be improved, but step one is just look at the reality. And then, then if you say we're going to improve it, say, well, does it seem realistic that it could be improved to you? And again, that's why I put so much focus just on cutting spending. I think that's a lot more realistic than making schools actually work better. So it's from everything I've seen, they're just so dysfunctional, so disinterested in results. One tiny example that to me speaks volumes. At the high school that my sons were at for 3 weeks, on the list of required school supplies, you must have a highlighter. It's a highlighting marker. They were ordered to go and do highlighting. Now, there's actually a substantial academic literature in educational psychology on does highlighting text actually improve learning? And a very strong, reliable result is no, it's a complete waste of time. And yet, if I were to go and take these studies and staple them together and show them to teachers, can I imagine that they would stop us from requiring highlighting? No way would they change their minds. They're so stubborn, they're so disinterested in anything evidence-based. So, if we couldn't get them to stop highlighting, what are the odds that we could get them to actually start effectively teaching literacy or numeracy or any other subject?
For me, I look at your work and I say that the biggest thing that it pushes out, I try to imagine myself being the 18-year-old guy, the 21-year-old guy. It's the opportunity cost. I'm just talking from the student's standpoint. If I go down this whole path, I'm going to give my life up to this signaling process to the hopeful big employer that will be there to give me the hopeful job, even though automation is eliminating so much of it. But it's the opportunity cost. I just don't think so many people don't think about that. If you do this, if you go down this university path to get your puppetry degree, you could have been doing that.
So opportunity cost is very important. And I think you're right that people focus more on out-of-pocket costs than what they could have been earning instead. What almost any normal economist will just tell you is, we factored in opportunity costs and it's still a great deal. And, and my main reply to that is, for the people who finish, but so many don't finish, and finishing is pretty predictable. So again, the main message of the book is just that as a society, it would be better if we had less education, and there's some very easy ways of doing that, like cutting spending. And then for the individual, what I say is, The payoffs for education vary a lot more from person to person than you think, and in predictable ways. And again, especially for college, like the best predictor of future outcomes is past outcomes. If you did very well in high school, then college is probably selfishly going to be a good deal for you. On the other hand, if you did poorly in high school, then probably it's not going to work out for you. Good idea not to go.
I think so much of this conundrum that you're describing is also driven by parents. But I look at people my age with kids, even though we could have these conversations for decades about all the problems that exist in schooling, when they get the kid who's a 15-year-old, they then turn around and throw them into the same mindset that they've been talking about for 2 decades that they know is wrong.
The main issue I'd say with parents is that it's hard for parents to honestly admit to themselves that their kid is not college material. Parents like to believe in their kids. Again, it's probably especially moms. So like for most kids, I think when parents push them to go to college, it's the prudent decision. For the kid that's never been a good student in school, and then parents say go anyway, then I think that they are actually doing their kid a disservice. And especially for middle class parents, they just don't want to accept that it would be a better thing for their kid to become a plumber or electrician, and that's a much more realistic path. But in general, I think parents are normally responding just to the realities of our society, which is that if you want to get a good job, you need to do this.
You're not a guy that hates education. That's not the point here. We're trying to do this better. We're not trying to have, as you say, we're not trying to have this kind of Orwellian kind of system. What's the better way to approach this? I don't want to. You're a pretty blunt talking guy and whatnot, and you have no problem taking on a controversial topic. But this is not some kind of hatred of learning.
Right now, I am a professor. Ideas and culture are my life. What I do say is what should be done? So I think we really need to have a lot less education if people spend far fewer years in school, to start their lives earlier. And then in terms of how do we spread ideas and culture? This is one where I think we just have to be honest about how successful we currently are, and the answer is not very. Some of this can be solved with better teaching. But a lot of it is just that most students are Philistines. They just find this stuff boring. You could get the most exciting lecturer on Shakespeare on earth, and yet the number of undergraduates that would voluntarily just go and attend that class for no grade is very small. Good news is we've got the internet, which provides anyone with a connection endless free ideas and culture. Right. And, not just videos, but you can interact with people, I care a lot about ideas and culture, but I'm just grateful that the internet is around so that anyone who is curious now can go and drink from the fount of learning. Although, of course, just being realistic, we'll see that Kim Kardashian has vastly more Google hits than David Hume and always will. That's just pathetic. Human nature is broken in this way, I think.
Your internet example it takes your Princeton example and puts it on steroids. Everything is there for everyone, One last thing I wanted to address with you, which I really think is cool. I had him on this show, which is Peter Gray and his notion of play. This is so huge, right? To some degree, that's what you and I are doing right now. We're trying to play with the subject. You're talking about a different form of play, but why don't you explain to the audience your belief on play and maybe give some of Peter's views on it too?
Play is, of course, very fun for kids. Kids enjoy it. And to me, that's a big point in his favor, right? I'm a dad. I have 4 kids. And if kids are enjoying themselves and someone says that's not worthwhile, why not? That seems really good to me. I have trouble understanding how that could be, why that wouldn't be, something good. And actually, in the book, what I say is that, if while we're going and talking about how intrinsically great ideas and culture are, even if you don't go and actually get a job using them, I want to say, what's also great, even if it doesn't lead to a job, playing, just having fun, running around, playing hide and seek. A childhood without these things would not be a really good childhood. Now, I relied upon Peter Gray's work when he just talked about how, due to the enormous role that K through 12 school plays in children's lives, kids today have really been greatly deprived of play. Right, and the amount of free play time that they have in their day is just so sadly low. When people talk about reforms to the curriculum, a lot of what I say is, how about we just go and have K through 12 go and and teach what people really need to know? Give them literacy and numeracy, vocational education, things that actually they're going to use, and then the rest of the day let them play. right? This is a lot cheaper. So, so especially for like K through 8, a lot of what the school is providing is daycare, and I recognize that's valuable. But just because you're in school doesn't mean you have to be getting schooled the whole time. I mean, right now, kids might be lucky to get a half hour of play per day. Why not go and give them 3 hours of literacy and numeracy, and then say, now you can either read here, or you can go out and play, or you can do a mix of both. Right? It also seems like a really good way of saving money. It's a lot cheaper to get someone that just blows a whistle on the playground and then like picks kids up if they fall down than to pay a college grad to go and teach them.
Most of the time when I'm listening to you, I've got a big smile on my face because you throw these things in rapid fire. You're like, K through 8, most of it's daycare.
Well, come on.
You're causing aneurysms out there. Hold on, my child is at K through 8 and it's this professor is saying it's daycare. Well, you know what? Actually, it's daycare too. You just don't want to admit it.
Yeah, it's just a really unpleasant kind of daycare where you're getting bullied all day, but like just moved from subject to subject, most of which the kids can't stand and they don't need to know anymore. Yeah, so I differ from Peter Gray a bit in that he's really into what's called unschooling, where he wouldn't even require students to learn reading, like literacy and numeracy. I think he's right that students who are not required to learn literacy and numeracy learn more than you would think. Although like all my experience with unschooled students is that their math skills are actually quite deficient, especially given how smart they are. And that does close off a lot of options because getting up to speed on math if you haven't done it, we're talking about years to go and catch up. So even like my view, I'd say it's like 2/3 Peter Gray, where like there's some things where I still look at if it's very important for adult life, then I say kids have to learn it even if they don't like it. Tough luck. You have to learn to read. You have to learn math. But again, for the other stuff, that's where I say, look, why do they go and have to go and do this dance class if they don't like dancing? Why can't they just go and read or in the library or go to the playground? Why are you making them do this other stuff? Which just seems cruel to me. And that's where Gray and I are very much on the same page.
Is there a topic that is underway that will cause additional Washington Post reporters to break down in the near future? Is there another topic that's being bandied about that you're thinking about pursuing?
Yeah, well, so actually, I've almost finished my next book. My next book is called All Roads Lead to Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration. This is actually a nonfiction graphic novel on immigration where I use the vocabulary and grammar of comic books to go and explore like all the important research on immigration. I mean, that one might not freak out the Washington Post people that much, although the book is so radical that I think it will freak them out. And then after that, I'm going to do a book on poverty, and that one definitely will agitate them. This is basically a book where I want to revive the old-fashioned distinction between the deserving and the undeserving poor. And then go and say, which is an idea that bothers people a lot to begin with. It's like, oh, you're going to say that's just because someone is poor because they, because they drank and got fired on 3 successive jobs, that then they should no longer be a priority. And yeah, that's just what I'm going to say. So we should focus on kids and refugees before we focus on degenerate alcoholics. That's one thing that I'm going to say. And then the book is going to go over the social science about what are the most important kinds of blame, or the biggest blameworthy sources of poverty in the world, things where we really can point fingers at people and say, you're doing wrong and you're causing poverty and that's bad. So that's what I'm going to do in that book. And again, that book is going to have really something to bother people from almost every political view. So, I'm just going to talk about bad policy in the third world, which will probably bother leftists. It's going to talk about immigration restrictions in the first world, which will bother most conservatives, and then I'm just going to talk about irresponsible behavior and the blame that goes along with that, which I think actually is going to bother almost everyone. We strangely we're in a society where even conservatives now don't want to go and blame someone for destroying their family in order because they're addicted to opioids.
I can't say that I know every last view that you have, but I have a feeling many of our views are aligned. But I do love the fact that my alma mater has seemingly become, I don't want to use the phrase dumping ground. That sounds so terrible. But
stay away from the dumping ground.
It's become this place where all these cool thinkers kind of go and take chances. Right? I mean, because that your peers, there's so many chances being taken at George Mason. That is just a really cool thing. I mean, sometimes we're going to get it right, sometimes we're going to get it wrong, but I think a lot of this search for the truth is a noble calling, really, Yeah,
I mean, what's striking is that the whole rationale for tenure is so the professors can do stuff like this, and yet hardly any professors take advantage of it. But for people like me and Robin Hanson, like we really are milking our tenure for all it's worth to go and work on what we are interested in, and even if it bothers people, we got dream jobs for life. They can't touch us.
Hold on, are you guys like in a race to see who can cause more trouble? I think Robin's Twitter feed is really getting very controversial. He's causing people to really have breakdowns.
Shame on those people who are mean to Robin. When people are mean to me, I just shrug it off. But when people pick on Robin, that really bothers me because he's just the sweetest guy. Sometimes I say, getting mad at Robin is like being mad at little baby Jesus. Where it's like he's just like an innocent baby there. He just has questions. He doesn't understand what's going to get you upset or not. So why can't you just listen to him and take his questions as in good faith, which is totally how he always means them.
I thought the Age of M was so damn cool. Hey, Bryan, I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we can talk again when something else comes out in the near future, which I obviously know is coming now. Where's the best place that people can go? The book.
Get it from Amazon. It's only get the Case Against Education from Amazon. It's only $20. You'll have it in 2 days.
Is there a website we can send people to, Bryan? Easily found on Google searches, but is there a particular one?
How about just you just do bcaplan.com. That's my general website. So everything that I've done is up there. And also I blog for EconLog. So I guess that's the rest.
Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.